My name is Sienna Vale. That used to mean something. It meant old money, private schools, and a last name that opened doors. Then it meant nothing. I was standing in my parents' dining room, surrounded by their guests in gold-threaded dresses, when my father's voice cut through the noise. If you choose him, you choose to live without us. My mother didn't look at me. She stared at her wine glass like it held answers. I was holding Kai's hand. This man I'd known for 6 months, who fixed cars and smelled like engine oil and honesty. I looked at my father's face and made a choice that would break me before it could save me. I took Kai's hand tighter and walked out. The door closed behind us. I didn't know it would stay closed for 5 years. The first month was adrenaline. I moved into Kai's one-room apartment that smelled like coffee and old wood. The windows didn't lock properly. The heat came on whenever it felt like it. I'd grown up in a mansion where the temperature was controlled by a woman named Margaret, who worked in the basement. Here, I wore 3 sweaters in February and called it character building. I thought I was brave. I thought this was adventure. I wasn't ready for what came next, the quiet loneliness of being erased. My phone stopped ringing by week 2. Not because people were mean, but because silence is easier than confrontation. My best friend since childhood, Violet, texted once. Your parents are telling people you're on a sabbatical. I understood what that meant. They were rewriting the story. Instead of their daughter who chose wrong, I became their daughter who needed fixing. The distinction felt important then. It took me years to understand it didn't matter. Both versions left me out. Kai never complained. That was the thing about him. He didn't rage against my family or make me choose between them and him over and over again. He just lived. He'd wake up at 5, work on his car designs with borrowed tools and salvaged parts, and come home with coffee for me and a question about my day. How are you really? He'd ask, and I'd realize no one had asked me that in months. I started crying in our apartment. Not pretty tears, but deep body-shaking sobs that lasted hours. He'd sit beside me without trying to fix it. That's when I understood what real support looked like. I got a job at a coffee shop. The owner, Marcus, was kind without being pitying. He didn't know who my family was, and somehow that made it easier to show up. I learned to make lattes. I learned people's names. I learned that my worth wasn't measured in my last name. But I also learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I'd see a woman in a pearl necklace like my mother's and feel my chest collapse. Some days I'd catch my reflection and barely recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I was starting to like who I saw. For months in, I tried calling my father. Kai was asleep on the couch beside me. I dialed and hung up 17 times before I actually let it ring. My mother answered. For a moment I thought maybe she'd been waiting. "Hi, Mom," I said. She was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, "Your father doesn't want to speak with you unless you end this." I hung up. I didn't cry. I went numb, which was somehow worse. Kai's business started growing around month 8. He'd posted his engine designs online, just sketches really, and someone reached out. An investor who thought his sustainable technology could change things. Kai was terrified. He'd never wanted investors or growth or to be anyone important. He just wanted to build things that worked. I watched him struggle with it and I realized something. We both had been taught that ambition was good, but only if it was the right kind. Kai's kind, quiet, grounded about solving problems, was completely foreign to me. I had to learn to value it. By year 2, we'd moved to a small office with a garage attached. Rentec Motors. Kai's name first because he'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. The business was legitimate now, growing steadily. We weren't rich. We were secure in a way I'd never understood before. Not because we had money, but because we knew we could survive without it. That distinction changed everything about how I moved through the world. My mother showed up one afternoon. Just appeared in the garage while I was helping organize supplies. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy. "You've done well," she said, like she was making conversation about the weather. I didn't hug her. I couldn't. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how to bridge that distance anymore. We'd been separated too long. The space had filled with too much grief and resentment and things left unsaid. I offered her coffee. She declined. She left after 15 minutes. It was the saddest conversation we'd ever had because it could have meant something, and we both knew neither of us knew how to make it. That night I fell apart. Kai found me on the kitchen floor, and I told him about the visit, About the relief I felt that she'd finally come, and the crushing disappointment that it changed nothing. I want them to feel sorry, I admitted. I want them to understand what they did and regret it forever. Kai sat with me for hours. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He said, I know. But what would that actually give you? I didn't have an answer then. Took me another year to find one. Year 3 brought success I hadn't expected. Kai's engines were getting real attention. Universities wanted to partner with him. News outlets called it a breakthrough in sustainable technology. They started calling him Sir Kai Ren. Because he'd been awarded some honor I didn't fully understand. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had rejected him for not having enough, and now he had more than they ever would. But here's what surprised me, it didn't feel good. I thought vindication would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in a room where the person you're trying to prove something to still isn't listening. My sister called. Not to apologize but to ask if Kai could help with something. Her husband's company was struggling, and maybe Kai's technology could help them pivot. I almost laughed. No, I said. She sounded shocked. But he could really help us. I understood then that my family's love had always been conditional on what I could provide. Even now, even when I had something they wanted, they couldn't ask me how I was. They could only ask what I could do for them. I told her I'd pass along his contact information, but I wouldn't be the bridge. I was tired of trying to connect with people who didn't want to meet me halfway. That conversation broke something open in me. I realized I'd been waiting for an apology I might never get. I'd been performing my own success like a play put on for an audience that wasn't watching. I started going to therapy, something I should have done years earlier. Dr. Patel helped me see that I was still giving my family power by waiting for their acknowledgement. What do you need from them? She asked. I realized the answer. I needed them to understand that I'd done nothing wrong. I needed them to see me as worthy. But those were things I actually needed from myself. Year 4. I stopped checking social media accounts that showed my family's lives. Stopped wondering what they were doing or if they ever mentioned me. Stopped crafting stories in my head about our reunion. I filled that space with other things. I volunteered at the community center. I took pottery classes, which I was terrible at but loved anyway. I made actual friendships with people who chose to know me, not people bound to me by DNA and obligation. My life got smaller in some ways but so much bigger in others. Kai and I got engaged quietly. No big announcement. Just him one night asking me to build a life with him officially. We were in our apartment, it was bigger now but still modest, and it felt perfect. My family didn't call. I didn't expect them to. I invited my sister anyway with no pressure, just an open door. She declined. That hurt, but it was the clean kind of hurt, the kind that doesn't get infected because you let yourself feel it instead of hide from it. The wedding was small. Kai's parents came from his hometown. My friends from work were there. Dr. Patel was there. People who loved me because they chose to, not because they had to. Walking down the aisle, I realized I'd been waiting for my father to walk me down. Then I realized I didn't need him to. I'd walked myself here. Every step was mine. That felt like the truest freedom I'd ever known. Year 5 came without fanfare. My father reached out through a mutual acquaintance. He wanted to meet Kai about a business opportunity. Part of me waited for the sting of being approached only because Kai was useful. But mostly I felt tired. Tell him no, I said. Kai was surprised. Why? Because I've spent 5 years healing from the fact that I wasn't enough for them. Now that he's someone they want, I'm not going to make myself the bridge back into my life. We don't owe them access. What shocked me was that Kai understood completely. He'd never expected my family to come around. He'd built his life without needing their approval. That was the most attractive thing about him. Not that he'd become successful despite their rejection, but that he'd never let their opinion determine his worth. If they want a relationship with us, he said, it's not going to be transactional. It's going to be real or not at all. I received a letter from my mother 3 months later. Not an email or a phone call, but an actual letter in an envelope. She apologized. Not perfectly. It was stilted and careful, like she was reading from a script she'd written and rewritten. But she apologized. She said she'd been wrong. She said they'd been wrong. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know she'd finally understood it. I read that letter 5 times. I cried, but not the broken kind of crying. The kind that releases something. I didn't rush to reconciliation. This was the part one had to learn the hard way. Healing isn't the same as going back. I wrote her back. I thanked her for the apology. I told her the truth, that I loved her, and I always would, but that rebuilding trust takes time and consistency and real work. I told her I wasn't interested in pretending the last 5 years didn't happen, but I was open to a new version of our relationship, one built on honesty instead of expectation. Took another year. Slow lunches where we didn't talk about Kai or money or business. Just me telling her about my life and her asking questions and actually listening. My father was slower. He attended Kai's keynote speech at a conference, and afterward he approached him. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. Kai shook his hand. Later I asked how it felt. "Okay," Kai said. "Not amazing, not terrible. Just okay. He's your dad." That's enough. That's when I knew I'd married the right person. Not because he'd won some victory, but because he didn't need the victory. I didn't throw the letter from my mother away or frame it like a trophy. I kept it in a drawer, and sometimes I'd read it when I needed to remember that people can change, even if it takes years. I also kept letters I'd written to her and never sent during those 5 years. Letters where I raged and grieved and begged for understanding. I kept them because they were real, and the journey from that desperate person to the one I'd become was worth honoring. My father asked if Kai would consider joining the family business. Kai listened respectfully and then said no. He'd built something he believed in, and he wasn't interested in something built on different values. My father didn't like that answer, but he accepted it. That boundary, Kai not changing who he was to fit into their world, was the most important thing that happened in our reconciliation. My family had to learn to value me and Kai as we were, not as improved versions of ourselves. We started a scholarship fund not to prove anything but because we had the resources and we remembered what it felt like to not. It went to students from low-income backgrounds pursuing science and engineering. I didn't put my name on it. I didn't need credit anymore. The work was enough. I was enough. That realization came quietly on an ordinary Tuesday, and it was the most powerful moment of the whole journey. 5 years after walking out of my parents' house, I walked back in for dinner. Not because I was returning to who I'd been, but because I could finally visit without needing them to validate me. Kai was with me, but I wasn't leaning on him for safety. I was just walking in as myself. A woman who'd survived without them, who'd built a life with meaning and purpose and real love. My mother looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. She was seeing me, actually seeing me, not the daughter who'd failed or the daughter she could use. She was seeing Sienna, and I was finally okay with being seen.